Hollywood critics looked at Michael and said, "No, thank you." The audience looked at Michael and said, "Cool story. Here's $217 million." And just like that, we have another beautiful little reminder that critics can write the reviews, critics can write the think pieces, critics can furiously type the words "problematic legacy" while sipping on an oat milk latte, but they cannot force regular people to stay home. Because while the critic class was busy grading Michael like it was a college ethics exam, the audience showed up anyway. Not quietly, not politely. They showed up with receipts. $217 million worldwide. Around $97 million domestically. A huge international launch. A giant critic-audience divide. And one very awkward question for Hollywood's professional permission slip department. If your reviews are so powerful, why did everyone ignore you? Welcome to the Box Office Autopsy, and this one comes with a moonwalk. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Critical Nerd. For all my returning subscribers, I humbly say thank you and welcome back. You already know the deal. We keep expectations low and the receipts high, and the Hollywood cope properly refrigerated. And if you're new here, welcome aboard. Around here, we talk movies, television, box office reality checks, Hollywood chaos, and the ever-growing gap between what audiences actually want and what the entertainment media keeps insisting they should want. So do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell, because today we're talking about Michael, the Michael Jackson biopic, and the way it just moonwalked directly over the critics' chalk outline. Because this movie did not just open big, it opened huge. And more importantly, it opened huge despite the critics. There's the story. Not just that Michael Jackson is still famous, not that just nostalgia sells, not just that music biopics can make money. The real story is that once again, the critic class and the paying audience appear to be living in two completely different zip codes. Critics said one thing, audiences said another, and the box office said, "Would you like that in hundreds or 20s? So today we're going through the receipts, the critic-audience divide, why critics rejected the movie, why audiences showed up anyway, and why this is another warning sign that Hollywood's gatekeepers do not have the control they think they have. Because Michael may be a biopic, but this opening weekend was a referendum. Let's start with the numbers, because opinions are fun, but receipts are better. And according to the reported opening weekend totals, Michael launched with roughly $217 million worldwide. That includes about $97 million domestic and around $120 million plus international. That is not a pretty good little opening. That is not, well, there's some interest there. That is not the studio taking a flop, putting it in a nice suit and calling it audience discovery. That is a massive global launch. That is event movie money. That is apparently people still know who Michael Jackson is money. Shocking, I know. Who could have guessed that the guy behind Thriller, Billie Jean's Beat It, Bad, and Smooth Criminal might still have some cultural pull? Certainly not the people who keep acting like audiences need a permission slip from Rotten Tomatoes before buying a ticket. And that's where this makes this opening so funny. Because this movie walked into theaters carrying a lot of baggage. Critical skepticism, controversy, pre-release discourse, media side-eye, the usual entertainment press routine where everybody acts like they're bravely discovering complexity for the first time. And yet the audience showed up anyway. They heard the warnings, they saw the reviews, they watched the critics wave their tiny little red flags, and they said, "Cool, one for IMAX, please." That is the power of an actual event movie. When audiences feel like something matters, or at least feels big enough to leave the house for, the critics suddenly become background noise. And in this case, the background noise got drowned out by a cash register playing "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough." Now here's where it gets really awkward. The critics' score was reportedly sitting around the high 30s to low 40s, somewhere in that 38 to 40% range. So critics were not exactly throwing roses at the screen. More like throwing tomatoes, then writing a 1,200-word essay about why tomatoes are a metaphor for capitalism. But audiences? A completely different story. The audience reaction was reportedly in the mid to high 90s, with some reports around 96 to 97%, plus an A- cinema score. So let's put that on the board. Critics, around 40%. Audience, around 96%. Opening weekend, $217 million. That's not a gap. That is the Grand Canyon with the popcorn bucket. Grand Canyon with the popcorn bucket. I remember that one. And we keep seeing this happen. Critics review one movie. Audiences watch another. Critics look at the movie and say, this fails to interrogate the full socio-political architecture of celebrity mythology. Audiences say, the moonwalk scene was awesome. And then critics get mad that regular people did not show up to the theater with a thesis statement. Now, to be fair, this is not some random action movie where the only question is whether the explosions were loud enough to rattle your soda. This is a movie about a real person, a famous person, a complicated person, a controversial person. So yes, critics were always going to judge how the movie handled the legacy. That was inevitable. But the opening weekend tells us something very important. Audiences were not waiting for critics to approve the purchase. They knew what they were buying. They were not walking into a courtroom documentary. They were not walking into a deposition with choreography. They were walking into a Michael Jackson movie. They wanted the music. They wanted the performances. They wanted the glove. They wanted the hat. They wanted the moonwalk. They wanted the spectacle. And apparently they got enough of it to tell their friends, yeah, go see it. That is the part Hollywood keeps forgetting. Audiences do not always want the movie critics audiences do not always want the movie critics wanted. Sometimes they want the movie that was advertised. Crazy concept, I know. Somebody alert the Academy. Now let's be fair, because the lazy version of this video would just be critics hated it because critics hate fun. And look, sometimes, yeah, critics see joy in the wild and immediately call animal control. But in this case, the criticism is more specific. The major complaint seems to be that Michael is too polished, too controlled, too sanitized, too estate-friendly, too focused on the music, the talent, the image, and the legend, while not fully confronting the darker controversies around Michael Jackson. Because basically, critics looked at the movie and said, this feels like legacy management. And that is not an automatically ridiculous point. When you make a biopic about a controversial figure, people are going to ask what you included, what you avoided, and why. And, that's fair. But here is where the conversation splits. Critics were reviewing what the movie left out. Audiences were responding to what the movie delivered. Critics wanted a deeper reckoning. Audiences wanted an event. Critics were judging the omissions. Audiences were reacting to the iconography. And opening weekend showed which side had more demand. Because audiences are not stupid. They know Michael Jackson's story is complicated. They know there are controversies. They know there are allegations, documentaries, defenders, critics, legal arguments, public debates, and decades of cultural baggage attached to that name. Nobody walked into Michael thinking, wait, there's discourse? Please, come on. The public did not need a film critic in 2026 to inform them that Michael Jackson was controversial. They knew, and they still bought tickets. That is the uncomfortable part for the media class. They assume that if they emphasize the controversy hard enough, audiences will react in the way they want. But audiences are not a remote control. You cannot just press the disapprove button and expect everyone to sit down like trained poodles. Sometimes people make their own choice. Terrifying, I know. So why did audiences show up? Well, pretty simple. Because Michael Jackson is still Michael Jackson. You can debate the man. You can debate the legacy. You can debate the movie's framing. You can debate what the film includes and what it avoids. But you cannot debate the size of the cultural footprint. This is not some niche artist where audiences needed a critic to explain why he mattered. This is Michael Jackson, the Jackson 5, Thriller, Billie Jean, Beat It, bad. Smooth Criminal, the moonwalk, the glove, the hat, the videos, the stadiums, the choreography, the image, the mythology, the entire pulp cultural operating system. People did not need critics to introduce them to Michael Jackson. They already knew the songs. Heck, their parents knew the songs. Their grandparents knew the songs. I knew the songs. Their kids probably know the songs from TikTok, YouTube, commercials, weddings, school dances, and every DJ who has ever needed to revive a dead dance floor at 10:47 p.m. That is why the movie opened. Because music is different from normal IP. A superhero franchise can burn goodwill. A sci-fi franchise can alienate its fans. A streaming show can vanish into the algorithmic swamp. But music sticks. It lives in people's memories. And Michael Jackson's music is still everywhere. That is event power. Not because critics blessed it, not because the media approved it, not because Hollywood's discourse committee stamped the file, because the audience already had an emotional relationship with the material. And Hollywood, well, they should be paying attention. Because while studios keep spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to force people to care about cinematic universes, multiverse homework, soft reboots, legacy sequels, and characters nobody asked for, here comes a music biopic with songs people already love, a subject they already recognize, and a theatrical hook they understand immediately, and boom, $217 million. Almost like audiences respond when you give them something they actually care about. Groundbreaking stuff, I know. Maybe Disney could put that in a spreadsheet and ignore it. Now let's zoom out a little bit here, because this is bigger than one movie. This is part of a larger critic-audience divorce. And no, that does not mean critics are always wrong. It doesn't mean audiences are always right. It does not mean every badly reviewed movie is secretly good. Sometimes critics hate a movie because the movie is bad. Sometimes audiences like a movie because it gives them exactly what they came for. Sometimes both things are true. But the larger issue is that critics and audiences increasingly seem to prioritize completely different things. Critics often focus on themes, subtext, cultural framing, messaging, legacy, representation, deconstruction, and whether a movie properly interrogates whatever it is supposed to interrogate this week. Audiences usually ask much simpler questions. Was I entertained? Did I care? Was it worth leaving the house? Was it worth the ticket? Did it give me what the trailer promised? Did I have a good time? With Michael, audiences apparently said, yeah, overwhelmingly. The critics may have wanted a darker, sharper, more confrontational movie. The audiences wanted the Michael Jackson experience, and the experience won. That is the divide. Critics reviewed the movie as a cultural document. Audiences watched it as a theatrical event, and the theatrical event printed money. This is why Hollywood keeps getting surprised. They keep listening to people who are not always representative of the actual ticket-buying public. They build movies for approval instead of enthusiasm. They chase discourse instead of demand. They obsess over what will play well inside the media bubble, then act confused when regular people shrug. But when something connects directly with the public, no permission needed, no approval narrative required, no critic consensus necessary, just a ticket, a seat, and a reason to care. Imagine that. And this is the real point. Critics are allowed to criticize the movie. That's not the issue. If a critic thinks Michael is too sanitized, too safe, too selective, too protective, that's a fair discussion. The problem is when the critic class confuses criticism with control. There is a certain kind of entertainment coverage now that does not just say, here's what I thought of the movie. Instead, it says this, here's how you're supposed to feel about the movie. And audiences, quite frankly, they're tired of it. They can smell it. They know when a movie is being pre-framed for them. They know when the conversation is less about the actual film and more about guiding everyone toward the approved opinion. And sometimes the public, well, they just simply refuse. And that's what happened here. The critics brought the objections. The audience brought the ticket stubs. The critics brought the discourse. The audiences brought the box office. The critics brought think pieces. The audience brought $217 million. And no, that does not automatically make Michael a masterpiece. Box office does not prove quality. We say that all the time here, and other YouTubers and channels say that too. Bad movies can make money. Good movies can flop. Opening weekends can be driven by nostalgia, curiosity, controversy, fan demand, or marketing. But box office absolutely proves interest. And in this case, the interest was massive. So if the argument was, nobody wants this, the receipts say otherwise. If the argument was, bad reviews will kill it, well, the receipts say otherwise. If the argument was, audiences will wait for critics to tell them what to think, the receipts definitely say otherwise. Now, the danger is that Hollywood will learn the wrong lesson, because Hollywood learning the wrong lesson is basically a sacred tradition at this point. They will look at Michael and say, oh, we need 27 more music biopics. No. They will say, quick, who else had a famous catalog? Get the rights before Netflix makes it 8 episodes. No. They will say, what if we make the cinematic universe of a state-approved jukebox nostalgia? Please, for the love of God, don't. The lesson is not simply make more biopics. The lesson is give audiences something they already care about. Respect what they care about. And stop treating them like they need elite permission to enjoy it. That right there is the lesson. If you sell people a Michael Jackson movie, they probably expect Michael Jackson music, Michael Jackson performances, Michael Jackson spectacle, and Michael Jackson iconography. They're not buying a ticket for 2.5 hours scolding from a cultural studies panel. They are buying an experience. And theatrical movies need experiences. Big sound, big crowd, big emotion, big reason to leave the couch. That is what Michael gave people. Maybe critics wanted something else, and that's fine. But audiences wanted the event, and the event delivered. So what's the final verdict? Michael just handed Hollywood critics a very expensive reality check. The movie may not have won over reviewers. It may not satisfy everyone. It may not be the definitive version of Michael Jackson's life. It may be too polished, too safe, too selective, depending on who you ask. But as a box office event, it worked. And that is the part critics cannot review away. The audience showed up. The numbers showed up. The receipts showed up. And the critic-audience divide got exposed again. Critics said no. Audiences said encore. Critics brought think pieces. Audiences brought the ticket stubs. Critics brought the discourse. Audiences brought $217 million. And somewhere in Hollywood, an executive is staring at these numbers and realizing something horrifying. Maybe the audience still matters. I know. Terrible news for the spreadsheet people. So I want to hear from you out there. Did Michael prove critics are losing influence? Was this nostalgia? Was this curiosity? Was this genuine audience enthusiasm? Or is this another sign that regular moviegoers are tired of being told what they are allowed to enjoy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're down there, do me a favor, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next Hollywood box office autopsy. Because trust me, the receipts are not done printing. And as always, keep your expectations low and your receipts high. I'm the Critical Nerd, and I'll see you in the next one.